Okay, so welcome everybody. Good afternoon. This is our second March workshop on modeling and animating realistic crowds and humans. The workshop is organized by myself, Zerin Yumak, from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Information and Computing Sciences. And I'm co-organizing this workshop together with Wouter van Tol, Julian Petre, and Helen Olivier. So I want to just ask the all organizing committee to turn off their cameras and introduce themselves, please. Maybe start with Wouter.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Wouter. I am a postdoc at IEEE in France with Julien Petre. And I will be chairing the second half of the workshop, so after the break. And my research is on crowd simulation, but I will tell more about it near the end of the workshop.
And yeah, and Helen?
Yeah.
Or Julian, yes.
No, please, Anne-Hélène, go ahead.
Okay, so hello, I'm Anne-Hélène Olivier. So I'm assistant professor in Université Rennes 2, so in human movement science. And my research interests include visuomotor coordinations between pedestrians with strong applications in crowd simulation.
So finally, I'm Julien Petre. I'm senior researcher at INRIA in Rennes. And my topic of research is on crowd simulation mainly, with big interest in virtual humans and virtual reality as well.
Okay, thank you. So I follow with the goal and scope of the workshop. So the goal of the workshop is to present the state-of-the-art and new research perspectives on modeling digital humans, animating them, and also modeling of groups and crowds. And we like to establish a new platform for developing virtual human technology at the intersection of VR and AR. As I said, this is the second version of this workshop. The last year, it was also again organized as part of the AIVR conference for the first time in San Diego. And some of the topics we cover in this workshop are modeling and animation of humanoid characters, expressive character animation, including face, gaze, and gesture animation, machine learning and deep learning algorithms for character animation, avatars in virtual reality and augmented reality, social interaction and groups of virtual humans, and also navigation for autonomous characters and crowd simulation. We also would like to thank our international program committee. I would like to name them quickly. It's not a very long list. So Panayiotis Charalambos from Cyprus Institute, Roland Herart from Utrecht University, Ludovic Hoyet from INRIA Rennes, Rachel McDonald, Trinity College Dublin, Michael Neff from University of California Davis, Nuria Pelashana from Universitat Politecnica de Catalunya, and Jungdam Won from Facebook AI Research. And we would like to thank the program committee members for their quality reviews for the submitted papers. The workshop is composed of two parts. The first part is about virtual humans, and I will be chairing this session. That will be from 1:30 to 3:30. We will start with this introduction, followed by the keynote from Rachel McDonald, and then we will have two paper presentations, one from avatars rendering and its effect on perceived realism in virtual reality, and the second one from entitled Comfort of Aircraft Seats for Customers of Size Using Digital Human Model in Virtual Reality. And finally, we will have another paper presentations that will be presented by Alicia Bohars. And the keynote speech will be continued for 50 minutes, including questions and answers. In the second part, we will switch from individuals to crowd simulation, which will be from 5:30 to 9:30. We will have a presentation from Helen Olivier and Julien Petre on the present and CLIPE projects, EU projects. We will have three paper presentations, each of them 20 minutes, including Q&A sessions. And finally, a presentation from Wouter van Tol from 7 to 7:20. And we will conclude around 7:30 with closing remarks. Yes, I think that is it for now. I just want to to inform the audience that this session is recorded. And you can post your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand whenever you have questions for the speakers. And in the other times, please keep your microphone unmuted. You can turn on your video or turn off your video, but we like to, of course, see your faces and see more interactive discussions. So we encourage you to do that as much as possible. Okay, then I would like to switch to our keynote speaker today. We are very happy to have Rachel McDonald today as our keynote speaker. And it's my pleasure to introduce you, Rachel. Rachel McDonald is an associate professor at the School of Computer Science, Trinity College Dublin. And she combines research in cutting-edge computer graphics, and she investigates the perception of virtual characters to both deepen our understanding of how virtual humans are perceived and directly provide new algorithms and guidelines for industry developers on where to focus their efforts. Her talk is entitled The Rise of the Virtual Human, and we are looking forward to hear more about that. So the floor is yours, Rachel. So I've just stopped sharing now.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Let me see if I can share correctly this time. Maybe I'll turn that off. It might help me. Okay. So, that's much better now. I can see everybody as well. Okay, can everyone see that? Everyone see that okay? Yeah. You can hear me, yeah. Okay, so let me just thumbs up. Okay, great. Okay, so just to get started. Okay, so I've called this talk "The Rise of the Virtual Human," and the subcategory being importance of realism. What's the importance of realism in this whole realm? So I'm just going to start off with this. I mean, well, first of all, I've been studying virtual humans for you know, like over 10 years. And I really feel like we're at a very different moment in the last couple of years, and even day by day, we're at a different time with virtual humans. They're starting to really kind of explode into the mainstream. So I've just picked a couple of images here that might be interesting. So virtual humans are starting to be everywhere. So apart from the obvious places like movies and games and different applications, there's all these new, very, very exciting and interesting applications. I've chosen a few here. We've got on the left there, Michaela Souza, who's a virtual influencer. So she's a completely virtual character, but has millions of followers online, hundreds of thousands, and has a whole career for herself, even though she's a virtual human. There was a recent virtual concert by Travis Scott. Obviously, with the pandemic and everything, people are starting to get a bit more inventive as well with how we do entertainment. So I don't know if anyone has seen some of the work from Travis Scott in Fortnite. He had a whole concert, and it was very, very successful, very exciting. But again, he was represented as this virtual human. It gave him different possibilities for performance. So he was able to be very, very large on the screen and do all sorts of exciting things in real time. So I guess that's part of it as well, the fact that these characters are able to be driven in real time these days. We've got virtual YouTubers nowadays as well, where YouTubers will stream online as a virtual character instead of as themselves. And then you have obviously things like Facebook Horizon, where social media and space, VR spaces are going to become populated, and you'll be representing yourself with a virtual human. Again, during the pandemic, this has seen a big increase. There's also some, there's some new avenues such as virtual celebrities. There's an example down here of Justin Bieber, who was recently on an advert for Amazon Music. So it allows kind of celebrities to to take on work that they may not have the time to do, and use their virtual celebrity to do it for them. So use their virtual character to advertise things or do different promotional work for them. So there's a company that does that at the moment, that creates virtual celebrities, and they can be then outsourced to do other work. So it's very, very exciting. Lots of new, very interesting kind of uses of virtual characters at the moment. I really feel like they're really becoming mainstream now, and there's a lot of interest in them. With regard the state of the art then in virtual characters, you look at kind of the GDC demos in the last couple of years, things like Siren and the Digi Double demos from Digital Domain. So there's a massive change now in what we can achieve in real time. So these kind of characters would have only been possible for high budget visual effects studios in the past, but now they can be actually rendered in real time. Again, okay, these are still big high budget productions, but we're now seeing the ability to render these online. There's a lot of sharing of information, and there's a lot more kind of availability of virtual human data, like scans and various other things that we didn't have even in the last 5 years, which allow a lot more interesting research, and the development is going very fast. There's a world of possibilities with regard to real-time virtual humans. And the more we use them, the more decisions we're going to be having to make about how we represent the virtual humans. And there's lots of very interesting questions around this. So for example, if I wanted to have a virtual human step in as me to represent me in some scenario, we might be able to outsource some of our, like the virtual celebrity, Justin Bieber was outsourcing his some of his promotional work to his virtual celebrity. But similarly, we might be able to in the future use artificial intelligence characters to represent us in meetings, for example, or book restaurants for us, or do different things like this. So it's very interesting to try and think about, what would I like that virtual human to look like, or how should it represent me? So the appearance of the virtual human and its capabilities in terms of animation are really kind of important. And similarly, when you're interacting with virtual humans in the future, you want to have a sense that you know what's behind them. So for example, if you were interacting with Digi Doug there, and it wasn't being driven by a real human, it was being driven by an AI, for example, because the appearance is so realistic, you might have certain expectations about that character. So I guess the representation tells us a bit about what we expect for the conversational abilities of that character. So for example, if we started talking to Digi Doug and we realized after a while that the conversation was very limited, that might be kind of jarring to us, or it might not be kind of what we expect. Whereas if we see maybe the Justin Bieber example of the virtual character that looks more kind of cartoony, we might be able to accept, more or different things from these different characters. So I guess the point being that, there's a lot of questions around, how virtual humans will be represented in the future. And I suppose we still don't know a huge amount in terms of perception of virtual characters, especially when they start to reach this level of realism. What is that doing? How is my brain reacting to this type of character? What do I expect from them? What do I find appealing, and what do I find negative in that sense? So lots of interesting kind of questions around virtual humans, and I'm just going to take a look maybe at one of these questions, and then have a look at some of the other work that we've done around that area. So I'm going to have a look for now at the question of realism, because this is a question that has been replicated over and over again with virtual characters, with this theory of the uncanny valley, which started back in the 70s with a robotics professor, Mori, which is where when you have a virtual character and they start to become more realistic, you start to become, you know, that you really interact with them and you like them until the point where they come so realistic that it starts to be confusing, and then you have this drop, this uncanny valley of a negative reaction. So I guess this uncanny valley has never really been proven or not proven. There's been lots of studies on it, but there are, you know, conflicting reasons for why this happens. But again, this comes into sharp focus, this idea of realism, and is it important? You know, we're the top companies are striving for hyper-realism, photorealism, but do we actually need this, or is it going to end up causing a negative response? So on the other side, you could also say, well, how about I make all my characters look appealing and cartoony, which is you know, something that we've become very used to in CGI cartoons, such as The Incredibles here. But there are times then, and especially in the future of our usage of virtual humans in different scenarios, where cartoon characters may not be appropriate. This is one example here from the Puerto Rico aftermath of Hurricane Maria, where Facebook launched their Facebook Spaces characters in this kind of disaster area. So this was actually perceived kind of negatively as a promotion because of the fact that the cartoons were kind of jovial, kind of fun, and it just didn't really fit in with the scenario, which was what they were showing. So they were showing a very terrible event, but with cartoony characters. So that kind of just didn't quite work. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's no real answer to this, in the sense that, like, should we push for realism? Should we go for cartoony? I guess the task that we're doing will be important for it. But again, I think it's really important that we look at perception of these virtual characters in different scenarios and try to start to establish what are the appropriate you know, render styles of the characters in different scenarios, or what way are we going to react to various things, and can appearance even change the way that we react to characters? So like a lot of these movies that we're looking at, that we say we have negative reactions to characters, maybe it's just the movie that we didn't like. So, you know, it's important to kind of see, if we had the same scenario but with different virtual characters, would this give us a different response? And I suppose this has driven a lot of the research that I've been doing over the last almost 10 years into this topic. I've been kind of driven by this idea of, you've got the same performance, you've got the same actions, but with a different character. And is that going to cause an effect? Because this is something that it just doesn't happen in real life, because, you know, a person is themselves. They don't tend, unless they're acting, for example, to inhabit another person, or they're not able to massively change their appearance. But again, things like filters on Snapchat and that are becoming very sophisticated, deep fakes and all that as well. So it does feel as if we're on the cusp of being able to represent ourselves with different representations in the future very easily. So again, how does that affect our perception? So I'll take a look at this. Is kind of the overview of what I'll be discussing. So I'll be kind of talking first of all about character creation, because we haven't got to this point where virtual humans are starting to be used a lot by chance. There's a lot of recent advancements in things like deep learning, photogrammetry, real-time rendering, that are all driving this massive explosion in character creation and our ability to be able to create so many different characters at different budgets. So I'll talk a bit about optimization. So a little bit of work that we've done on optimization. I won't go into a huge amount of detail. And then I'll talk a bit about character appearance. So what are the effects of changing the render style or the appearance of the character? I'll then discuss some of our more higher level behavioral experiments, where we're actually looking to see, do the differences that we make to the character appearances change the behavior of the viewer? So if I'm interacting, like having a conversation, for example, with the virtual character that's represented in different ways, how does that affect my my actual behavior in that interaction? So I'll talk a bit about some of the work that we've done in that, and then we'll make some conclusions. So this slide, I didn't realize was all clicking. So this is just an overview of the kind of different elements of the pipeline in creating virtual characters. Again, the interesting and exciting thing about working with virtual humans and the fact that the research is constantly evolving means that this pipeline is probably already kind of obsolete. But I suppose it's a kind of overarching visual effects pipeline. But again, there's new methods coming in that are changing the way we're doing things. So this is the general pipeline that we've been seeing for the last, we'll say 10 years, 20 years in virtual character creation. So you have your character creation stage, which is usually involves some sort of scanning if you're talking about highly realistic virtual characters, or else, of course, it will involve lots of artistic work otherwise. Then you have your character rigging, so getting the character so that it can be animatable. You've motion capture, can be applied to the character in a stage called retargeting of the face, but also of the body. And then you have your real-time display. And again, the way that we display virtual characters can be through VR headsets, on in a cave, or on a just a general computer screen. So these are all the stages, and each stage, I guess, is quite intensive in computation and in labor as well, so time consuming. So when we started our work in facial animation, we noticed that the character creation stage was very, very time consuming. Do I have everything in there? Sorry. Oh, she's just animated. Was very, very time consuming. And this, we look to try to optimize some of these stages in order to improve them. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. I just have one slide here on other work in the area. This is a massive field, virtual character creation. And this is even an old slide. I've just added a few bits of extras. The work is just moving so fast. But the main area of content creation that's out there with others that are researching is things like self-avatar. So if you take a photograph of yourself, that you can create an animatable virtual character. I suppose this is the kind of holy grail of where we want to be at, to be able to just create a photogrammetry, a light stage version of a realistic virtual character from just a single image. So there's a lot of work in deep learning going on there, lip sync animation, moving everything into real time, improving the fidelity, like blending between blend shapes of virtual faces is very computationally expensive and also intensive in terms of memory. So trying to improve the fidelity while not increasing the computation is an area. Adding detail, geometry. So there's lots and lots of work going on there. And again, that slide is a bit even outdated. So then onto our own approach. So how we try to fit into this whole area and try to make a contribution. So this is a kind of a feedback loop where we use perception, and I know there's others I know there's others in the room here that are also of this mind. But just to explain, so you have your computation, your algorithms, whether they be for lighting or blend shapes, which drive the computer graphics. So our interest is then in the human perception of these graphics by running things like experiments. So getting participants into the lab to view these graphics renderings, give us their opinions on it, and feedback that information back into graphics. So whether it be in terms of guidelines as to what are the best types of representation, or whether it be in some perceptual metrics that can then alter perhaps the algorithm algorithms in some way to perhaps take some of the computation out while maintaining the perceptual plausibility. So this is the general kind of approach that we're taking, keeping perception and keeping the human in the loop. And as you can imagine, this means that we do a lot of perceptual experiments in the lab. So we have a lot of participants coming in. Of course, this is kind of a challenging thing at the moment, but we've moved a lot of these experiments online. Okay, so that's the overall approach. Then I guess the type of methodology that we use then, we follow obviously like kind of standardized questionnaires, direct measures. So bringing participants in and getting their direct opinions. So it can tell us things like, yes, this looked realistic. Yes, that looked appealing. And it can, you know, we can use things like Likert scales or alternative forced choice experiments. And here's an example of the TIPI, the 10-item inventory, personality inventory, which is a personality test that is taken for real humans. But again, we can alter these types of standardized questionnaires to use them for virtual humans as well, and see what your opinion is of the, say, for example, the virtual humans personality. So there's a lot of give and take, I guess, between real human experiments and virtual human experiments. So direct measures can only take you so far, because even something like the uncanny valley or this idea of negative response, you know, it's quite hard to measure that directly. You know, sometimes it's not exactly something that we are conscious that we are doing. So therefore, indirect or subconscious measures are super important as well to include. So things like behavioral, you know, does the behavior of the user change? And we'll talk a bit about some of our experiments in that. The psychophysical response or the physiological response as well. So we can put sensors on the skin, for example, or if there's some sort of implicit bias going on. These are all things that we test using indirect measures. Okay, so that's the general kind of methodology that we're taking with regard to running perceptual experiments, trying to feed them back in. So I'm going to move on now just to talk a bit about model creation and how we can feed back perception or how we can do some optimization on that. And then we'll talk more about the direct experiments. So as we know, model creation is very time consuming. I'm just taking an example here of a digital double, which is usually done using lots and lots of scans in a photogrammetry stage, such as this one. And the result is, you know, about 200, 300, 400, 500 different scans of the human's face. And these scans then have to be converted into blend shapes, which are in correspondence with each other, and which give a good, I suppose, you know, range of movement of the human's face. So of course, model creation also involves body animation. I'm kind of focusing a little bit more on the face here, because that seems to be the area where we have the most difficulty. So one of the questions that we looked at then was how many of these blend shape do you need to actually include, both at runtime and in the rig creation stages. So we ran some experiments for motion interaction games this year, where we looked at the importance of different blend shape activation levels, and with the aim of, for example, for crowds, if you wanted to, so blend shape models aren't used very often in crowds. So blend shapes being where you have lots and lots of examples of the scans of the face under different expressions, and then you blend them in to create the final expression at runtime. So these aren't used very often in crowds because they're so computationally expensive. So we've had a look at how you could maybe prioritize blend shapes that are most important and at different level of detail distances, in order to get good animation, but while also you know, not having to blend so many blend shapes. So we've done some perception experiments on this, And we've also looked at creating a mathematical model to fit with the perceptual results. So that's one area of optimization, and I think that's particularly interesting for crowds, so it's something that we're going to continue. But then we also looked at the rig creation stage and optimizing. There's some work we presented at Eurographics this year, where we were looking to optimize the number of blend shapes that needed to be scanned in the rig creation process. So we used an integer linear programming problem. We kind of solved it using a set packing algorithm to basically pack as many expressions into a single scan as we possibly could, get the actor to replicate that, and then we would optimize the rig to have the maximum range of motion while having the minimum possible number of blend shapes that we have to include in the process. So these are two work that we did looking at optimization. We've also looked, this is unpublished work, but we've also been looking at optimization in the runtime stage and using perception to do that. So we've tested various different models so this is very preliminary work, but it's just kind of the final point in the rig creation, runtime animation and rendering. So looking at what are the different effects that are most important for perception of realism. So we ran like various different versions of the same character. We ran participants looking at all these different effects that you can do, like subsurface scattering, even to the range of film grain and screen space irradiance, dynamic textures, and then we looked to find basically perceptually what could be noticed versus what couldn't, and that this would allow us then to optimize our results as to make sure that our characters looked as realistic as possible while using as few of these advanced features as possible to reduce computation. We also looked at real-time ray tracing there, and we found that like our maximum high quality using all the ambient occlusion and everything was just as perceptually realistic in most scenarios, except for some angles. So there are some gains to be made using perception experiments when you're looking to optimize. And again, when you're talking about crowds, this could be optimized even further at different distances. So do we really need all of these highly detailed shadowing effects, dynamic textures, when you're only going to see the character at a certain distance on the screen? So again, this is something that we'll continue to investigate. Okay, so they're kind of more lower level, I guess, optimization techniques to improve character creation and runtime computation. So then we look a little bit more at appearance. So on the higher level then, so forgetting about computation or how hard it is to create the characters, what are our preferences in terms of render style then, or shape? Or what can we establish this uncanny valley kind of idea? So here we developed, starting in a paper in 2012, we developed a range of rendering styles using different render pipelines, and we basically let the artists create these styles themselves. And we were looking to determine what effect. So we just had two character models in this one, a male and a female, and they were realistic shape, but we changed the render style to make them more cartoony or more realistic. And we wanted to see that, with geometry exactly the same, animation exactly the same, what would be the effects of realism in that case. So that's it. I'm just going to kind of talk through all the studies we've done and then summarize the results that we got on those. So in those render experiments, we looked at things like how appealing they were, how realistic they appeared, but also indirect measures, how you interact with them and how your behavior changes. So then in 2015, we decided to look more closely at shape. So not only using this realistic shape and changing the different render styles, now we created a range of different shapes. Again, we got an artist to do this, to create these different kind of levels of abstraction of the character. And we were trying to replicate some of the industry characters. So we purposely didn't do a morph here. We purposely picked discrete abstraction levels. And we separated shape and material here. So down the bottom here, you can see the shape from left to right, going from realistic to, so from abstract to realistic, but then that's all at just material level 0. So there's very little material information. And similarly, all the way up. And you can see at the top there, we've got our stylized our very abstract shapes with a very complex kind of texture information on them. So we wanted to see what the range was and where you started to find things unappealing. So that was the main aim of that experiment. And then in 2020, so just this year, we presented at SIGGRAPH a much larger study where we investigated the effect of brightness and shadow. So in these previous experiments, especially in the first one, we didn't take into account, we just let the artists create these render styles. We didn't think about the brightness of the image or the shadow on the image. And again, I see this a lot in experiments that on things like the Uncanny Valley, where people use images, say taken from the internet at different of different characters. And one of the things about that is there's no consistency in terms of lighting or shadow. So we wanted to see then if we just altered lighting and shadow, would that alone be able to change your perception of the character? So we had a very, very complex set of, not complex, but a very exhaustive set of experiments, which we had a key, rim and fill light, and we changed different levels of intensity of the key and the fill to create different levels of shadow and different levels of brightness to determine the levels of appeal. Now, as I said, this was a really exhaustive experiment. We also did, we looked at realism then, so we went back to our old stimuli from 2015 and looked at the effect of shadow on those to see the effect of realism on lighting. Again, I'll show the results of all these experiments at the end, just to kind of summarize where the key results that are important for realism. So again, this was an exhaustive set of experiments, took an awfully long time to conduct. I think it took about 2 years for us to do that paper. In the meantime, we created this and we presented at SAP this year, a real-time lighting tool. So the idea of this real-time lighting tool was to help us improve the speed at which we conducted our experiments. So before then, we were looking at method of constant stimuli, where we would create discrete examples of say, for example, lighting under all the different conditions, and we'd show them exhaustively to participants. This experiment was leveraging modern graphics hardware, where we can achieve real-time lighting. So we conducted this experiment in Unreal Engine, and we allowed the participant to in a method of adjustment, where they could, again, this is a very common procedure in our experiment paradigm in psychology, but it's one that we leveraged here with real-time graphics. So we allowed the participants to basically select the lighting. So we gave them sliders to pick, the brightness and the dark and the shadow amount, and we gave them different tasks, like, light this to be the most appealing, light this to be the most intense. We found this to be a really good experiment, and I definitely encourage people to use something like this in the future if the experiment allows. It took much less time, and it allowed us to investigate more parameters, because this space has massive amount of parameters. This kind of experiment is very useful for that. We also were able to validate our experimental results with the previous work, showing that arrived at the same conclusions, but in a much shorter time. So that was one just aside there. So just to go back then, so the key findings then amongst all of those experiments in terms of realism, we looked at lots of other things, but we found in all of our experiments that realism was found to be appealing. So we didn't find any negative, really, any major negative response towards realism particularly. Again, we haven't quite reached the highest level of realism in a lot of these experiments. So again, it would be interesting to look even further, you know, at the more higher level detail, like the DigiDub, Doug, and Siren examples. But we found our examples of realism to be generally appealing. It was the characters that were hard to categorize that were considered more eerie. So those that were, you know, they weren't quite cartoony, they weren't quite, so even in the cartoony area, when they were abstracted, if the characters were, you know, unfamiliar or difficult to categorize, these were the ones that were considered the most eerie or the most unappealing. And I suppose this is kind of in line again with the uncanny valley hypothesis. So shape then was the main predictor of realism. This was an important result for us because a lot of our experiments where we were looking at the effect of realism, we would get the same character model, which would generally be a realistic character, and we would change the style on that character. So here we found that it was shape. So what I mean by that is it's once you change the geometry to look more abstract, this was the main predictor of realism. So if you had a realistic shape, it didn't matter so much what the texture was on it, it still appeared more realistic. So this is I think this is an important one for future experiments that are looking at varying levels of realism because it's important that the shape changes. We found then that the material was the main predictor of appeal. So if you had a more so yeah, the effects of the level of detail of the material affected appeal, and this is kind of in line with I suppose makeup application and photography, where you try to kind of blur out too much of the textural information on the face to try to smooth everything out. So that was found to be the case in our experiments. For the brightness experiments, then we found that the brightness of the light source was by itself able to improve appeal. So again, I think this is really interesting that if we just brighten up the light source on our virtual characters, we can instantly improve appeal. And this was the case across all different emotions. So even if the character was expressing, for example, an angry emotion, if you brighten it up, it does look more appealing. The light direction we found had no effect on appeal, so it didn't matter where we located the key light. We didn't do an exhaustive amount of experiments on that, so that could possibly in the future have an effect, but we didn't find it. We found that CG lighting was more appealing than toon. I didn't show the toons very much here. And finally, that darker shadows didn't affect the appeal of realistic characters. So we found if we darkened the shadows on our cartoony characters, they instantly started to become less appealing. But if we had dark shadows on our realistic characters, it had no effect on appeal. So dark shadows can be used to intensify emotion and things like that. So using them on realistic characters doesn't seem to have an effect, but using them on cartoon characters will reduce the appeal of those characters. So these are the kind of key findings that we found. And again, all of these experiments were very much direct measures. So like literally asking, how appealing does this character look? So I'm conscious of the time now, so I'm just going to keep moving on to our kind of more behavioral experiments. So I'm not going to show.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm a multi-model embodied virtual agent with realistic appearance. I was developed by researchers at Trinity College Dublin in collaboration with digital double company ISCO.
Stop right there. So sorry, this is where we're starting to look now. We're interested to look at behavioral response from virtual characters, and I guess one of the big potential interactions in the future that we'll be having with virtual characters is this idea of conversational agents. So if they have a voice, if they have the ability to speak back to you, to interact to what you're saying. I have an example here where it's a healthcare example where we're looking at triage for medical scenarios. So testing.
Okay.
Conditions.
Do you have a headache, temperature, or a cough?
A temperature and a cough.
Okay, I'll note down a temperature and cough. What was the last temperature you recorded?
38 degrees.
38, noted. Is the cough a new cough?
Yes.
Are you finding it difficult to breathe?
A bit, yes.
Okay, conscious of the time, so I won't let her continue. So just showing an example here, this is very recent work that we've done looking at kind of conversational agents that have a higher level of interaction. So we're hoping, you know, there's so many aspects involved in this type of interaction. There's the appearance of the character, there's the animation, there's the voice, there's the facial animation, there's the reaction of the user and how you can input that to create reactions from the character. So, you know, analyzing the behavior of the user with respect to the character can be very, it can tell us a lot. So it's not just about, yeah, that character looks more appealing if we brighten the light. It's like, okay, if we brighten the light, do we get a better response from the user? So this is just a brand new agent that we created, but we did do some experiments on this, and again I'm conscious of time, so I'll skip through these quite quickly. This was an avatar experiment where we looked, I'll just show some stimuli.
I think the milk would be a good source of calories and energy.
So we had different combinations.
I don't think we would need the milk. It would be too much effort to carry it for too little energy.
Voice and face.
I think the book on edible animals would be helpful to find food. The flashlight might be useful, but only during the night. I don't think the book on edible animals...
So this was an experiment that we conducted to look at the multimodal effect of voice and facial expression and the realistic or cartoon agent. So in this case, we did, so there is a phenomenon that, you know, when you're talking and you're smiling, you can actually hear that smile in your voice. So we were interested to determine if this would have a positive effect in an interaction with the virtual agent like this. So the experiment that we did was basically where it was a moon landing task where you had to decide what items you would bring with you to finish this task. So you first of all choose your items with a bit more care than I'm taking there, and then the agent would go through each of the items with you and say, well, no, I think we could use this, would be better than this, or they'd give you some information about it.
I don't think we would need the milk. It would be too much effort to carry it for too little energy. The rope could be handy, but carrying it would slow us down.
Okay, so the experiment continued there, and we ran this on hundreds of participants, about 5, maybe even 1,000 participants in a national gallery, and you know, some people saw the smiling voice condition, some people saw the smiling face condition. But in general, the key findings that we found there were that the cartoon agent had more positive traits, so that it was more appealing, more attractive. But we got the same ratings for things like trustworthiness, intelligence, knowledgeability for the two agents. And in terms of behavioral response, we found that participants were more inclined to accept the suggestions from the cartoon agent. So they would accept the suggestions and change their suggestions based on that. And we found then the audio-visual mismatch was perhaps interpreted as sarcasm. So when you have a smiling voice, but a neutral face, or the other way around. But again, there's lots of work to be done in this area as well. But these are just kind of some initial responses from participants. Again, we take that result of the cartoon agent having more positive response with a pinch of salt, because the agents were very different in appearance as well. So perhaps if that it could be that the realistic character was not as appealing, for example, just in general. Okay, so I'm not going to go into these experiments. So these are some other experiments we looked at, which are related to kind of agents. So we looked at things like personality from head nods and eye gaze. The main thing that we found there was that personality didn't have a huge effect, a render style didn't have a huge effect on the personality. So we were interested to kind of altered the way the virtual agent responded to use. But so we did find that head nods and eye blinks are an effective way at portraying a personality in a conversational agent. Or the render style had no effect in that case. I'm kind of conscious of time. Have I a few more minutes, or should I be wrapping up?
Yes, we normally have until 2:30, but I think it doesn't harm a lot to a little bit a few minutes extended. So
okay. So I'll move quickly to our VR experiments. Sorry, I kind of crammed a lot into this talk. So just very briefly, then I'll just talk a little bit about our virtual reality experiment. So I've talked a bit about the kind of appearance, how that directly affects our perception. Then if we change the appearance in a conversational or our higher level interaction, how does that affect our behavior? So the task of the moon landing example was just kind of a way of trying to interpret trust levels between the agent and the participant. So in virtual reality, then you have lots more, you've got the ability to investigate a lot more behavioral responses. So you can look at things like proximity, so how close you come to the agent. So we all know that personal space is maintained at different levels depending if you're, for example, a business associate or if you're a friend. So we felt that proximity would be a good measure of affinity to a virtual character. This is work done with Katja Ziebrich. So all of this work is her work. Mimicry then as well is something that can be measured nicely in virtual reality, because if you mimic the gestures and the tone of the virtual character, it's an indication of social presence anyway, that you at least feel this character is like a real person. And then obviously things like the length of time in VR. So using VR to assess virtual characters is very effective. So these are 4 experiments that Katja ran when she was at Trinity. And again, I'm just going to summarize over all of them. So we looked at different virtual character representations, so ranging from abstract as possible to realistic. And we ran, multiple experiments in the Science Gallery and various other places. So we looked at personality as well. And we did an in-lab full embodiment experiment. So the main kind of hypothesis behind all of these experiments was we were trying to test the effect of proximity. So whether or not proximity would have would be a good measure of your affinity to a virtual character, or how much you like that virtual character. So we tried it in lots and lots of different ways, in various different types of interactions to see if we could get an interesting result. So do I have, oh yeah, so, but generally the experiment went that the participant was set up in with either mocap or VR. They would do a training room, so that usually in the training room there'd be a pillar. So this character here is representing the user itself. There'd be something like a pillar instead of the virtual character. Then in the experiment room, we'd have the real
watering the plants. Yeah, I just came from the hospital visiting her, and she's in so much pain. It's so terrible to see her like that. I was driving that night.
Okay, so this was a character expressing a sad scenario, and we were interested to see if realism had an effect on your empathy towards that character as well. So do you feel more empathetic towards the character if they're rendered realistically? And yeah, so we also measured proximity. So the user was here. Obviously, they saw a first-person view of this scene. They were then asked to collect a controller that was located behind the virtual human, and we measured then the proximity distance. So the questionnaire was conducted within VR because we didn't want to break the presence, and we measured things like embodiment, place illusion, social presence, and empathetic concern. So over all the 4 experiments that we did, I'll briefly go through the results. I know I have just 1 more minute. So we hypothesized that the realistic style would increase place illusion being that you felt that you were really in the place, and social presence, meaning that you felt you were in the presence of another person. We found this to be the case. And some different results in the various different experiments, but generally this was the case, that the realism did improve both place illusion and social presence. We hypothesized as well that the realistic style would increase your empathetic response. This was a mixed answer. So in one of the experiments, realism was linked to higher concern, but just for one of the personality types. And in experiment 4, we found there was higher concern for the sad photorealistic character than the simple character. Again, sorry, we tested these at different render styles. So there was some mixed results there, but I think this is something that we would need to look at further to see if how empathy or concern is for different levels of characters, because it's very important in general for future VR experiences. Do I place the person in a highly realistic scenario, or do I put them in a cartoony scenario, or a more simple scenario? One of the other results, we found that proximity didn't have an effect in any of our experiments under any of the different types of proximity measures we did. So we feel that we certainly weren't able to establish an effect of proximity or how close you came to the character with regard to their render style. But we did find proximity affected things like, you know, if it was a sad character, it showed us that the comfort level was lower with the sad character, or higher, sorry. There was an effect of gender, where males in general were more comfortable with the close proximity. And proximity also gave us an indicator of interest. So we had a zombie character at one point that people all got very, very close to. So we think it was more to do with the interest in the detail rather than realism. Okay, so finally, I'm sorry for over doing it. So in conclusion, there's lots and lots of future interactions that we're going to be having with virtual characters. From our sets of experiments, we found that it's complex. The interactions are complex. Decisions you make, like render style, lighting, material, will affect things like personality, emotion, sense of presence. So all these little factors are really important. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done to understand exactly how we should represent ourselves as virtual characters, or how we should represent them in different scenarios. And again, there's a lot of work to be done on speeding up the creation while considering the perceptual effect. Just a very, very quick thank you to all my collaborators. So my own team, who have all left me now. I have a new team. So all their great work was what I presented here. And then all the external collaborators as well, and to my funding as well, agencies and Science Foundation Ireland. So sorry to have kept you so long. I'm very happy to take any questions you might have now. I'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting, inspiring talk. So we have some time for 1 or 2 questions. So if you can write it in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and take over, unmute your microphone and ask a question. And yeah,
because I have the host role in this meeting, I cannot raise my hand. So that's a bit sad. So I have a question, but I will, if there are other hands, I will give them we can give them priority and save me.
Yes, I see Giuseppe Vizzari.
Yes.
I think maybe let's start with that, Walter, so we can
follow
up with that.
no problem. I don't want to take over, but the question is a little bit on the side, or compared to what you have exactly shown, that was quite focused on visual appearance, and to some extent it's related to the dynamics of the virtual character. I mean, it's really more a curiosity rather than a question on the work you showed. To your knowledge, are there any studies that evaluated the perceived realism of maybe the same character behaving in two different ways? One more, let me say, plausible, and one much less plausible, right? Like something like I'm talking right now, and then I take off my my headset and I go away. It's implausible because I started a question. So maybe something not as extreme, but something like that.
So are you talking about kind of in an interaction, some kind of behavior that's implausible? Yeah. So we haven't got to that. I guess we're kind of at that stage now where we have a character that we can actually get to interact and change the way they respond. But any of the previous experiments we've done anyway have mainly looked at pre-recorded sequences. So we would have like a motion capture sequence, and we get an interaction effect to that. But yeah, I think I agree with you that there's something even more than just the animation realism. There's the behavioral realism, and yeah, not only, you know, so I guess we're kind of doing Wizard of Oz type experiments there, where it's like assuming a real type of interaction. But yes, and something that we're looking at now is as well the dialogue, you know, and the plausibility of dialogue. So things like if you're using like a synthesizer for the speech, and you're synthesizing not only the audio, but also the dialogue, you know, there's many different other factors going on there as well. So we're trying to pare that down at the moment with, you know, natural voice versus text-to-speech voice versus the dialogue. But there has been kind of research in the conversational age, you know, like chatbots like Alexa and things like that have looked at that. So we're trying to kind of leverage those research and bring them into the domain with the character. So yeah, I mean, there definitely have been studies looking at behavior, and I think generally, you know, not huge studies, but there have been some in the past. And I think generally the consensus is that you expect a character to behave, you know, the appearance gives you an expectation for the behavior. So if you see a highly realistic character, you're going to expect it to behave in a certain way, you know, whereas you might be more forgiving of like a cartoony looking character, for example. But I don't know, I haven't seen any very controlled experiments on that. But I may be wrong.
Thank you. In a sense, it might relate to what you were investigating with the smiling, more smiling face and smiley voice, because probably if there is a cognitive dissonance between, you know, if it's really realistic, but it behaves in a strange way, it might be probably perceived even worse than the sketchy character acting sketchy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think robotic, there's some work in robotics as well, and HRI, HCI in this area as well, looking at, I suppose they look a lot more at the behavior, you know, from a graphics background, I've been looking more at the appearance and animation.
Yes.
But yeah, there's some work in there as well. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so we are like 10 minutes behind our schedule. If there is one short question, then I can, I think, go for that. And otherwise, I think we should move on, and then we will be able to, of course, answer the questions from the chat and also from the Slack channels. There is more room for further discussion. Even after this session, that's also possible. So I can just get one short question. Maybe Walter, you were
Okay, yeah,
yes.
I had 2 questions, but now it's 1, so that's good. It was answered. I had a question about the term appeal. I don't know 100% for sure what it means, but it sounds like something very subjective, right? Like how much do you like this, or are you attracted to this character? So my question is, to what extent can you say anything general about this if it is such a personal thing? And also maybe is the term clear enough for test subjects? Like, do they all have the same definition of appeal in their heads as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's something that I suppose it's a term that we kind of landed on because we felt it was the most appropriate for what we wanted, because a lot of the research in psychology would have been looking at things like attractiveness, right? So we're not really interested in attractiveness as such. That wasn't really what we were aiming to look at. So appeal is actually a word, you know, from the Disney's principles of appeal for cartoon characters, and this is where we kind of landed on that word. And every time that we use the word, we define it for participants. So how we define it is we say a high appeal means that you would like to see more of this character, and you would be captivated by a movie if it had this character as the main role. So that was kind of how we would generally how we would define appeal. Yeah, so we were trying to avoid people going for attractiveness. So it's not that you're attracted to this character in some way or that you found it unattractive. So because appeal can be for kind of villain characters as well, right? So you can have an appealing villain. So it's more about, yeah, what appeal in design and appearance. So we haven't had any issues with participants having difficulty with that particular word. I think it has been understood well, as far as you know. I felt confident to use it multiple times because, you know, we didn't find huge variances between people's interpretation of it. But yes, yeah, it's important, of course, to always define it at the start, just to be sure they're all doing the same thing. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Rachel. Again, as I said, there will be more room for discussion afterwards through chat. So there are many questions. I have also myself a lot of questions, and Julian also said. So yeah, that is a good sign. Very, very much thought-provoking talk. So I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone. So then we can move with the next speaker, Alejandro Rios.
Hello, good afternoon. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. McDonald, for this wonderful speech. It's very related on what I want to tell you in my presentation. Because with Nuria Pelechano, we've been working on different types of rendering for virtual clouds in virtual reality, and how the rendering affects the perceived realism in the participants in the virtual environment. And we know we've been working in different aspects in virtual reality that can be improved to improve the perception of the sense of presence in the participants. If we improve something like the rendering of the environment, the navigation metaphor, the behavior of the avatars, the rendering of the avatars, there are many things we can improve in a virtual reality environment that affect the sense of presence or the feeling, the general feeling of being there in the virtual environment. And if we achieve that participants are more comfortable being in a virtual environment, we can achieve as well they behave as if they were in the real world. And for some applications, this is necessary, like collaborative virtual reality applications. We need the participants to behave as natural as possible. And we've been working on this kind of aspects, trying to improve them to get the participants to feel more comfortable in the environment. And one thing we've been working specifically is in the appearance and the behavior of the virtual characters. And as Dr. McDonald said in her presentation, you can improve many different aspects of a virtual character that impacts or influence the users, and changing some aspects like lighting, shape, material, rendering style, etc. An emotion can be transmitted to the participants, like being more comfortable, or even getting more closer to the avatar, because they feel is more friendly in a way. Changing lighting can be transmit type of emotion as well. And the thing is that we've been checking all these papers, of course, and we found all the papers work with just one character, because what they are focused on trying to change one aspect to see if the character looks more appealing or looks more friendly, etc. But we have a very simple question. What happens with a crowd? Can a crowd transmit emotions to participants? If a participant is in a virtual environment that is populated with many avatars, can the whole crowd transmit an emotion to the participant? And this is what we were working with in this little work. We prepared a little experiment as a pilot experiment in which the avatars are rendered with different quality. We performed a between subject experiment in which we had a virtual train station with a crowd, and both the virtual train station and the crowd are rendered with different quality. We had a very old experiment 2 years ago. We created this train station, and well, we created with the material, the 3D material we had in that moment. But in this year, we created a new version of the same train station with a much better quality. And we wanted to check if the participants perceive the realism is improved, perceive a real improvement in both rendering styles. Unfortunately, we only have 13 participants in each group, and we performed this experiment. We asked just a simple questions, and well, what we got is quite interesting. You will see in a minute. The participants enter in the virtual train station. There is a crowd, and the participants have to perform some tasks. And while they are performing the last task, there is an alarm that goes off, and there is a flashing light, and all the avatars run towards an exit. And this is what we did. On the left, you can see the low quality rendering style train station, and on the right, you can see the better quality. The situations are the same. The avatars run towards an exit. And well, most of the participants, as you can see, followed the avatars that was presented in a little conference a couple of years ago. And the thing is that we've changed, as you can see, the type of the avatars. On the right, you can see the rocket box avatars, and we also changed the illumination. We added global illumination. We added high quality textures, a better environment map, basically physically based rendering materials. We improved the avatars, and we asked the participants to answer 3 little questions. First, we asked if the whole quality, the overall quality of the visualization was good, if the movement and appearance of the avatars were realistic, and the most important for me is if the behavior of the other avatars made the participants feel nervous. And we got a very interesting result. It was a Likert scale from 0 to 9, and oh my God, we got lower results for the high quality rendering. That was a bit surprising, but we have an explanation. And as you can see here, the 3 questions got lower results for the high quality rendering, but we think that both rendering styles are similar. We got avatars that look human, that run more or less the same way as in the high realistic train station. It was more or less the same. We have movements and appearance that more or less were the same. The better realism didn't improve the perception of quality of realism. But and the behavior of the other avatars as well didn't affect the nervousness of the participants. So we didn't find any significant difference. And we think that maybe the difference between both train stations should have been more exaggerated. They were already high in the first train station. The avatars were already human-like. They behave very well. I mean, the participants didn't notice much difference. Yeah, I have to say that we performed a between subject experiment. So maybe in the future, it's something that I will talk about in a meeting. We should change this. And the participants didn't get very nervous with the alarm and the avatars running. And well, we also asked them what their experience in games was, and all of them had very high experience with games. So we thought that this is a confound effect, that gamers are more used to play with bombs and explosions and many effects, and maybe looking at a little fire and some avatars running didn't affect them at all. So it's something we still have to think about. Besides, all the avatars in both the old and the new station have the same animations, both walk and run. They didn't have any other animations. And this work and the results made us think that maybe just a few avatars running and doing anything else didn't have a real effect on the participant, that maybe we need something else, something like this. Maybe we should make the avatars do this. Facial expressions, arms up, screaming. This is something we still have to work with. This is an experiment we are preparing, and I hope we will have good results in a few weeks. This is the main difference. In the high quality rendering station, we have the avatars just running, but now we've added these facial expressions and arms up, things like that. So maybe we will find that participants get nervous, more nervous than just the avatars running and without any facial expression. So, and we also have to perform this experiment as a within subject, changing the order, of course. And of course, we cannot do this experiment with 13 participants. It's too many, it's not too much. We need more than 20 at least. You know that it's a bit difficult to find participants that go to the lab, try the experiment with the headset, and it's a bit complicated. So while we will find a way to bring them to the lab when this COVID thing is finishing, hopefully. And of course, we will not ask just 3 questions. We will use standardized questionnaires, and we will perform better statistical analysis. We got only the mean of the questions, and of course, this is something that has to be improved. And this is it. I've been brief, I think. And any question and any suggestion will be welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for your talk. Okay, so are there any questions from the audience? From the chat, or yeah, you can also raise your hands. And I already see one, Giuseppe Vizari again. Yes, please.
Yeah, interesting work in some way totally relates to my question to the invited talk, because you're dealing with behavior and the question is about realism. So it's the question is about it's a consideration. It's for discussion. I mean, in a way, the context of the experiment is somehow suggesting me that I should behave in a certain way. And probably part of my attention is devoted to the control of what I'm doing. So in a sense, I don't know if this is the most favorable setting to be asking something about the way the environment overall looks. Because at least I'm not the youngest one around, but I'm not even the oldest probably. But my experience with virtual reality headsets and controllers is that I'm not good at it. I'm not I don't perceive cyber sickness, but certainly part of my attention is about what I'm doing. And so I'm probably not that, focused so much on what happens out there. Maybe it's my limit, but in a way, I also had problems understanding the, experience of people in using virtual reality tools. It's not easy to understand, to ask how to self-rate about the experience. But I don't know, it's just a consideration. It might also be that the setting of the experiment is making it hard for people to really perceive the differences in the quality. It's just a contribution to discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. This is something that we've been talking about with Nuria, and is that participants in this experiment are asked to perform some tasks, like find a ticket machine, and then find a drink machine, and then doing different tasks. And some participants told us that they didn't even hear the screams. Can you imagine? They didn't even see the people running. I said, how come? How is it possible? And they said, I was so concentrated trying to finding an exit. This is the last task, find an exit. I was so concentrated that I didn't hear the people scream. I said, really? Really? But I could hear them. You were wearing the headset, and I could hear them. How you couldn't? And this is called oh, I forgot the word. Loading. Well, while you are performing a virtual reality experiment, you are doing many things, many other things, and it's true you cannot see the difference between both or what's happening there. And we are performing another experiment in which you are not immersed in the virtual environment, but you look at videos. We are doing that as well, and maybe we can find. Maybe we are not able to ask about the sense of presence, of course, because you are watching videos, but you can ask something like, did you see the difference between the avatars not screaming and the avatars screaming? And so this is something we are aware. We are aware about.
Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt due to time constraints. So yeah, thank you very much again for your interesting talk, and on behalf of the audience, we send our applauses to you as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to continue with our next speaker, Sarat Paniker. I think if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Sarat is a master's student in the Faculty of Industrial Design and Engineering at TU Delft.
I'll share my screen.
Yes, great. We cannot see your slides, I think, now.
Yeah, I'm still pressing.
Yes.
It works now? Yes.
Yes, it works.